volume rate. Like
No, I get that, but there's a lot of. I mean, it's not this. I mean, nobody knows anything about this.
No, it wasn't nothing negative. Here's the situation. It was nothing negative about Italy.
No,
It was
no.
such the massive pain. And
No,
then,
sure.
but nobody was taking it serious in the U.S.
I agree.
Here's the thing.
That interview took place a week or two before Trump shut down. That interview, and the infectious disease doctors knew all of this information. They knew what was going on all over the world. But today, you are resilient. Your reentry. I mean, you're looking at the. But I flash back to that day because I was in tears.
I get your point, but I'm trying to say it's also for example, the thing that it's elderly people who is dying more than young people, or for example, black and brown people in the US has a higher rate to get coronavirus. I mean, again, numbers make sense if you can read the numbers. Elderly people most of the time has other kind of preconditions. There's also, I think, something which we have to think, again, going back what you said about climate change. Yes, we live longer, but why we're starting to have chronic diseases in our society, like obesity, like hypertension and things like this, which are completely normal for some parts of our society. And so, yes, elderly people dies more, the higher rate. But if they do have other preconditions, it's easier they die more. And black and brown people dies. There's a higher rate in the U.S. for black and brown people who gets the virus. Yes, if they are working the worst jobs in public, it's easier they get the coronavirus. If you're working in Wall Street and basically whatever you do is complete in a complete sanitized ward, it's more difficult to get the coronavirus. For example, I spoke with a friend of mine. She works for the Angola embassy here in Rome, and she said, "You know what? Curious thing, in Angola, most of the people who has the disease is rich people. Yes, because those are the guys who were traveling and they got coronavirus in Europe."
We could label real quick anything, can't we? We can put a stamp on anything. It's the rich people. It's the ones traveling. I said Italy got contaminated really bad because the travel between China and Italy is big because of the fashion market, and they manufacture in China.
With all due honesty, I think we screwed up.
I want to start traveling again. So
I use a very unpolite term. We screwed it up.
Dr. Yu, help us out here. When can I start traveling again?
Let me share my screen.
From tomorrow.
Okay.
If you want, you can travel from tomorrow, actually. You have to stay 14 days in quarantine in Florence, which I understand will be a great
month. Nick, plan a month. Okay. And then you could go for 14 days and stay for 14 days and then go quarantine for 14 days.
Because I was over in Italy in October. Then I was in New York.
Dr. Yu figured out the share screen. I just want everyone to know Dr. Yu figured it out.
Figured it out, so I want to get
these stats are already outdated, but it does have a percentage of fatality if you get COVID. So you have a 19% chance of dying from the virus if you're critically ill. So, it doesn't matter if you're older or young. I mean, if you have a severe, like autoimmune disease, cancer, severe heart disease or diabetes, about 20% chance. And yes, age does matter. You got a 15% chance of dying. Now, combine age with critically ill, And that's why the majority are over 80 who have, diabetes, heart disease, or cancer, or autoimmune disease, because obviously their immune system is taxed, right? And the older you are, the less stem cell count you have, and stem cells can't repair your immune system. That's why, when you get older, if you do get stem cell therapy, you need it from a young donor, right? And then 10.5% had cardiovascular heart disease, 10% diabetes or high blood sugar, 60% cancer or some type of lung disease like COPD or something. Only 0.9 had no underlying issues, but yeah, it can affect the young if you are immunocompromised. So, and then just to go back to what really heals the body, we're going to beat it with a dead horse, is boosting your immune system, right? High dose vitamin C, but of course, a lot of doctors get criticized on this when the research shows, hey, clearly Linus Pauling, 2-time Nobel Prize winner, touted vitamin C to decrease, cold symptoms, right? Ozone therapy's got a lot of criticism. Plenty of research on oxygen. Ozone therapy helps kill the virus. It revitalizes your lung tissue, creates nitric oxide, which also can kill the virus and strengthen your lungs. Zinc, it interferes with the RNA transcriptase, so the virus cannot replicate. Zinc has gotten criticism, but of course, the media is controlled by big pharma. They just want to say what new drug is in town. And of course, stem cell therapy. Read this. The patients in China, their symptoms of COVID reversed in 2 or 3 days. Amazing. And now there's a bunch of rapid approval FDA approved studies with stem cells for COVID in the US. But again, the media doesn't cover the positive news, the promise of. So again, guys, I wouldn't really be scared of going out if your immune system is strong. The bottom line is, eventually we're going to have herd immunity, where everyone goes out, and guess what? You're exposed, but if you're healthy, you're going to develop the antibodies and be immune to the virus. In fact, once you develop IgG, that means you've had the infection for like a month or more. And
the minute I put him on,
and sure, some people are going to die along the way, but you're going to die anyways being cooped up in your house, suicides going up. You're not exercising, so you're not getting as healthy. You're eating comfort foods. You're going to have more diabetes, stress, heart disease by being in your cave. The Neanderthals in Europe, they had bone disease. It's called rickets because they were in the caves during the Ice Age and they didn't get vitamin D from the sun. They died of bone deformities. All the
people
that were captured in Africa, when they took them on the long journey, the boats to the U.S., their lips started cracking, their skin, because they didn't have vitamin C. They weren't eating oranges. It's called scurvy. So
that people on ships and the people in the submarines were having the same problem.
Exactly. So when people have these infectious diseases, they're like, oh, we need a drug, an antibiotic, antiviral. No, you need vitamins. You need vitamins. I'm sorry.
But, can I get my vitamins from this?
Yeah.
So, hey?
Coca-Cola, you could clean your car acid battery with that.
Yeah. Pringles.
Pringles and a campfire. You throw it in the fire, they'll explode. That's how much grease is in there, right?
That goo that gets on your window when you travel a lot and it's got oil and grease and it goos up on your windshield? We used to pour Coca-Cola on the windshield and they would eat that goo off.
Yeah.
But
David Cay Johnston has joined us. For those who don't know him, he's the author of The Making of Donald Trump.
That's great.
He's a Pulitzer Prize winner, a New York Times best-selling author. He's also wrote a book, one of my favorites, called Perfectly Legal, by the way, Roberto, who's an attorney in Italy, this is a really great book about how the American legal system works, or it doesn't. So the thing is, it's really, really a great little book.
Well, I got to show him this book.
You know,
Decision Points.
oh, George,
He signed it.
Oh,
He
Lord.
signed it. I'm a little jealous. He got
That's
to
not a copy. That's a personal signature right there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, David, since this is our leader, our fearless leader now, how's he doing when it comes to leading us out of the coronavirus problem?
Oh, he terribly. You know, in my other Trump book, it's even worse than you think, which I wrote in 2017. Actually, I think it's in that book. I said that if he became president and we had a pandemic, because we've known for a long time we're going to have another pandemic. I studied this issue in the 60s in college. I said Trump would have no idea what to do and it would turn into a complete disaster. That's exactly what's happened. So you look at the success rates at holding down infections in South Korea, which had its first reported case the same day that we had our first reported case. You look at what happened in New Zealand with a liberal government, Australia with a conservative government. And this has been a very minor problem because they followed the science right from the start. Trump, on the other hand, literally said this is a hoax. He's recommended these crazy ideas like injecting yourself with cleansers, which the makers of a couple of them, Lysol and Clorox, felt a need. Their lawyers said, you got to get out there and make a statement. Don't do this or you're going to have liability issues. Hundreds of people called poison control centers asking, how do I inject myself with these things? So, you know, you can argue that they're stupid people who made the calls, but when you're the president of the United States, you have to think about everybody. So this is just awful. It's going to continue to be awful. Donald has no capacity to learn anything that contradicts that which he wishes to be true. It's one of his major flaws that in the 30 plus years that I've known and covered him has been consistent.
And you have said that consistently, and I agree with you. And something somebody said, oh, you know, accounting, he'll take care of it. No, he hires accountants. What his problem is he didn't bring on board the right people to manage this. As a leader, that's what you do. You surround yourself with the smart people, and you delegate who needs to get the job done. And Donald doesn't know how to do that.
Well, indeed, Kimberly, you know, Donald said, I'm going to get the best people, the very best people. Who? I mean, really, you look at his staff, and I tweeted this morning in response to something the economist Dean Baker put up. Here's a complete list of the known anti-racists in the Trump administration. And then the rest of the tweet is blank. There's no, I mean, we've had person after person who's just manifestly unqualified for the positions he's put them in because Donald has no critical judgment about these things.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't think he thought through. I mean, who makes Mayor Giuliani or ex-Mayor Giuliani a science advisor?
Yeah.
But you know what?
Or who claims that Ivanka created 15 million jobs?
Well,
that's astonishing, but that's what he stood up in the White House and said she created 15 million jobs.
You know one thing. I mean, what you're experiencing now with Donald Trump, we had 20 years of Berlusconi,
yeah.
which to be honest, and I mean, Berlusconi is way more intelligent than somebody else.
Notice the words were very well chosen, Roberto. I noticed that.
And Berlusconi, one of the great strengths of Berlusconi has always been that he really was assisted by the best, at least in the first 10 years, he was assisted by the best lawyers, the best economists. The guy who was running television is a tycoon of the television market, and so on and so on. The problem is that if you have some egomaniac, which is basically running everything, and he thinks he knows everything better, then whatever advice you have, the advice doesn't matter because he will do whatever he thinks is the best thing. this is not really the issue. The issue is that, Europe decided to get rid of Berlusconi when he was too dangerous for the economy. Otherwise, the only thing which people like Berlusconi does is to create this division within the country, where you have you don't have this maybe you have it in baseball. In baseball, when you speak about Red Sox and Yankee fans, people who really hate each other. I mean, the problem with people like Berlusconi, Trump, Boris Johnson is that they get factions behind them, and whatever you say, whatever you do, will convince only your faction, your part of the people. So, thinking about how Trump does things wrong, in theory, is only emboldening the people who vote for Trump, because you, as a liberal, as a snowflake and whatever, hate the guy. The guy is the real deal. Which is kind of, it's a perverse kind of thinking. But for example, although all this campaign which CNN does about Trump managing the worst way possible the pandemic, I think will have only the result that those who those who watch CNN will be convinced what they already were convinced before, that Trump is the worst thing ever. But who doesn't and looks at Fox News, they will be convinced that he basically put against the pandemic by his own, and he found the vaccine at the end of the day. So
well, that's what they were trying to build. And Giuliani, right after they closed the country down, Giuliani and him came out with the hydroxychloroquine, like 5 days later, like it's some miracle. And in all reality, we found out that in February, Giuliani invested $2 million in hydroxychloroquine. So, and then he, a few weeks later, he's appointed the science advisor. I mean, the facts are going to start stacking up and tell the truth.
Well, Kimberly, Roberto is right, though, that what we're seeing is the principle of democracy grows out of the Enlightenment and the idea that we would have reasoned and rational debate. The American Revolution was led by the wealthiest, most educated men. They were all men. And so was the framing of the Constitution. These were people who knew their Cicero, they knew their Aristotle. That's not most of the population in any country. And unfortunately, in America, we have had a well-funded, almost 50-year campaign now to denigrate honest journalism. And that's had a corrosive effect. So your guest, Dr. Yu, who got off, said, the media are controlled by the drug companies. That's just nonsense. That's absolute, utter, complete nonsense. But that kind of thinking is all throughout our society. And it's exploited by people like Donald, who understand the conventions of journalism and how to exploit them. And one of the things that we need to get is a journalism that does more of what we try to do at DC Report and what George Lakoff, the cognitive scientist, recommends. And that is, instead of just spreading Donald's nonsense, you alert the reader, the viewer, or the listener that what you're about to hear isn't so. You then quote fully what was said, not cutting it up into little snippets, as especially newspapers and TV tend to do. And then you explain why that's not true or dubious or not to be believed. Lakoff calls this a truth sandwich. And it's really difficult for news is highly, highly competitive, even with all the shrinkage that's gone on. The fastest disappearing job in America in this century has been journalist. But it is it's a stodgy business in that once it has conventions, it tends to stick with those conventions. And Donald knows how to exploit them, and we need to have different approaches to this.
So that's, and you make a good homework point there that Donald knows how to approach him. Abhijit, hi.
I have a question from David. May I?
Yes,
sure.
David, in current situation, what you said that how this democracy and the media it works together. Coming government, which we see, I think by end of the year, United States would have its election for the presidential elections. In coming time, the party which has to come in the power has to maintain a certain level of transparency, and it has to be, people have to believe on the party, its policy, and its fundamental orientation about the environment, because nobody is going to vote for a party who is not very close to health and who is not very giving a confirmed scenario that we will not land up in this situation again. That how do you see that this kind of environmentalist government would come when there is no transparency into media, and it is somewhere a very twisted pictures comes out?
Well, I don't know what you mean by a lack of transparency. What are you talking about with this? What do you mean a lack of transparency?
What you said, that the version of media which is coming out is most of the time it is twisted and it is going through lots of struggle. That's the lack of transparency which people have to go through.
Okay. No, that is not the message I intended. I'm sorry if I was unclear about that. News is very competitive. And the news in the New York Times is not the news that's in the London Times or the LA Times or the Seattle Times. Different news organizations have different markets and audiences, and they approach things in different ways. But all of these organizations have this tendency towards the conventional way they've always done things. And Donald knows how to exploit that. What's going to happen in this election, I believe, and I'd love to hear what Nick and Kimberly particularly think about this, is that this is an election about Donald Trump. Either you believe this man is a demigod or a god, as he has called himself, or you believe he's a crazy man, and you need to get him out of there. And for example, George Will, an absolutely rock-ribbed, principled conservative, said in an interview this past week that he's going to vote for Joe Biden. He said, once in my life, I can bring myself to vote for Joe Biden because, as a Democrat, because we've got to get Donald Trump out of the White House. And Donald Trump is not a Republican. Donald Trump has taken over the Republican Party. My latest piece for DC Report, where I'm the editor-in-chief, and we have correspondents in Europe and America who are basically volunteers, former senior people at Fox, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times. My column there is that Donald Trump has been holding a political gun to the heads of Republicans. Either bow down to me or I will turn my people loose on you, and in a primary election, a Republican primary, you'll be voted out of office. And they've all been cowed. Well, he's out of bullets. And I wrote that the time is now for you to leave or be recognized as a moral jellyfish, spineless, blind, and drifting aimlessly in the waves of chaos that Trump is creating.
Well, that's pretty interesting. But here's what I see, David. There's a core group in the United States that are Trumpsters, no matter what.
Yes.
And the thing is, you can spend all day doing your arguments, but you're a libertard, and you can go ahead and do your libertard thing, and that's it. They won't listen to you. It doesn't matter what you say. You can put all your facts. It doesn't matter. But, conversely, on the other side, there's a whole group of people that are Sanderites that sit on the left wing of the world, and that their way is the only way that works. And these isms, in other words, I don't really care if it's communism, socialism. I don't care what the ism is, because I'm very pragmatic, as long as it works, because you can make an argument that socialism doesn't work, and you point to Venezuela and Cuba. Then you can say, wait, it does work. You point to Denmark and Sweden. So, there's good and bads on every system, but then there are people that are totally vested in their system. And I don't know what they vest in Italy. So, Roberto, what do they do over there?
Just to make a point.
Sure.
Which is, I think, to me, it's one of, as I said before, I had this discussion with a lot of people which is living in the U.S. Having a welfare state, a state who cares about you, and having a healthcare system which is state funded, it has nothing to do with socialism and communism. It's being human. So
Right.
I understand that. I mean, the idea that you have in the US about what is socialist in Europe, for us, it's just to basically share. I mean, there are things you cannot share, and one thing you cannot share, is healthcare, policing, defense, firefighting. I mean, you have things. The US are by maybe it's because there's a different way of thinking, but it's by far the best economy. And then you have people who dies because they have no social insurance. Those things. There's although we have a very Catholic. Although there are different countries and there are different different religion or different Catholic religion, different forms of Catholic religion in Europe. We have a very Catholic idea that we have to, since we are the state, we have to help each other. While you have this Calvinistic idea or Darwinian idea, where only who is the strongest survives. It's not the best way. I'm not saying your system is better than ours or vice versa, because our system goes down. We have to adjust to the worst, and while you try to adjust to the best. But there must be something in between. Where you don't need to spend, if you have coronavirus. For us, although we don't have a system where you have only social insurance, but it would be normal that who gets who get tested for coronavirus doesn't have to pay, because it's in the interest of the state that you don't get coronavirus. Mm-hmm. In the US, Donald Trump had to intervene because the insurance company would pay for you for the testing. And those things are, I understand that if you view it from the US, we have all the communists, well, socialists. Communists, it's a little bit too much, but Europe is mainly a social. It's not socialist. We are social. We try to share problems and solve problems.
Robert, I'm sorry.
Come on.
Yeah, government will come back in power after elections. Same government will come back.
In where? In America?
No, I'm asking to Roberto.
Oh.
Is it?
You think there'll be a change of government in Italy, Roberto?
Wow, we change government as I change underwear, so basically every day. Well, with this, there's a huge discussion now because there's a lot of things I've learned that I will do when I grow older, and one of the things is I want to be the opposition. It's fantastic to be at the opposing party. You only have to scream to say whatever the other guy has done was wrong, and that you would do better. And so now they're trying to say that the prime minister and the government did mistake, because there's no other way to. Whatever you do, you can do mistakes. And now there's a discussion whether he will survive the next few months, and we will have a new government. And I think we had more governments than actually coaches of the national team at the end of the day.
Yeah. Roberto, I think in the United States, politicians considered liberals here would generally be seen in Europe as centrists.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Angela Merkel is, by German standards, a conservative. By American standards, Trump's always denouncing her as being a lefty. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that America was settled primarily in the early years of it by people who were excluded from the guilds in Europe. That's why they came here seeking more opportunity. And that has carried down through generation after generation, this hostility to things like unions. And secondly, we have a whole series of mechanisms in this country to see to it that the lower your income, the less likely you are to vote. We have Tuesday voting. We have these efforts now at voter ID and other things to discourage people. And every election in the last 20 years, we've had these robocalls that have been made to the homes of lesser educated black and brown people saying, if you go to the polls, you're going to be arrested. And that's intimidated people. I think we may be, and we're going to know in November, but I think we may be on the cusp of a very great maturing of American politics and culture. That Donald Trump, if he is roundly defeated and the Republicans lose the Senate, the Democrats are certainly going to keep the House. But if they lose both the White House and the Senate, and Trump is soundly defeated, I think we may be moving into a new era and being more like Europe. That's been the great fear of the right wing in America, that we will become like Europe with universal health care, which saves a ton of money, with more labor protections.
Yeah, actually think about that, Roberto. Our fear is to become more like Europe. Just think about that one for a while. We're scared to death. We could become like Europe. They have universal health care and things like that. I mean,
funny thing is that we Europeans aim and want to be like you.
Yeah, of course. We're America. Look at us. We lead the world. Who leads the world in coronavirus today? We do. Who leads the world in the most deaths in coronavirus? We do. Who has the most expensive healthcare system in the world? We do. And who does the best?
I don't know. Because we managed to have a couple of court cases every year where people has been corrupt because we paid 3 times the normal price. But then again, that's something.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't go very proud of it.
Expensive, I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. So we like to lead in everything. David, just a question for you. What about the people that say, hey, this lockdown is, a communist plot. We want to be out there, and they're doing it right now, opening it up while we're at the height of the coronavirus, opening up all the cities of the world, the United States, so we can go out and meet and greet. Is that going to have an adverse effect?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, we are still on a rising plane of deaths. We had the highest number of deaths in America over the weekend, 3,000. We're going to have a second wave of this and maybe a third wave. There are a lot of people who convince themselves, thinking if I take vitamin C, which likewise the doctor you said, I think that's been proven to have no therapeutic value, that we are going to have continued spread of this virus. We're not going to get to an R, that's the rate at which the virus is spread, that's below 1. And there's some limited evidence that many people who are infected do not develop antibodies. That's a really scary prospect. If we have any kind of a pathogen that you don't develop antibodies to, that would mean this could be going on continuously. So I think these are real fundamental concerns. And when you see people out walking very close to each other, bringing their children, my word for them is idiots, in the classic Greek meaning of that word 2,500 years ago, which is someone who had no regard for anyone else, only themselves. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It just means they don't regard other people. They're idiots.
Right. Well, here's my prediction, and Kim knows that I made a prediction a couple months ago that we were going to go over 1 million people infected and 60,000 deaths by the end of the month. We did pass that. My prediction was right on, and so I'm making another prediction. Okay, and I'll do it right now. Yeah. And you can see my predictions because they're recorded, but this one's an easy one, just like that one. Okay, and here's the prediction. By the end of this month, we will have over 100,000 deaths in the United States and 2 million people that will be infected. And here's the reason why. You wouldn't believe it. They're saying it's a free-for-all out there. In other words, there is no protection, there is no guidance, there is no leadership. And when we looked at the leadership, and this really bothered me, okay? This is a medical condition last time I looked at, right, David? Right. So when you have a medical condition, do you go see your mirror to help you? I mean, it's ridiculous.
You go see an economist.
Yeah, you have a medical condition. You're going to go see an economist? Are you kidding me? Okay, you have a medical condition. I'm going to go see my politician. No, when you have a medical condition, you're going to go see a doctor, right? If you got a brain. When we have a leader who's going to lead us out of this, the first thing he brought in was the vice president of the United States, who was a politician, who had no medical background whatsoever. There was a book called The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam years ago. Okay, you probably read it. I was forced to read it. Okay, and what Kennedy did, he said, I'm going to bring the best and the brightest together to solve the problem. And the best, the brightest are not politicians to solve a medical problem. I am sorry. And if I have a heart disease, I'm not going to go. I like my mayor, but I'm not going to go see him. I love my county commissioners. I'm not going to see them. I'm going to go see a bloody doctor. This is a medical condition. It's not being led by a team of, and we have purportedly some of the best doctors in the world. And notice I said some. If you go worldwide, you will find the best doctors in the world. But here, when they said, well, I'm going to bring a team together, it's always limited to the United States. We don't even look outside of the U.S. and see what they're doing. Look at what we had Rikish on from Hong Kong. How are you doing in Hong Kong? You should have like thousands of deaths. They have 4. Okay. What's happened to the infection? Okay. They've already have a solution, or at least they're working on it. And what we're doing is we're walking around like, well, I don't know what to do. Let's do an experiment between the states. Let's have Las Vegas be an experiment city. Okay, what are we using to think with here? I mean, our leadership lives in a vacuum, and it's not rocket science. I'm sorry. We have the best and the brightest people, or some of them. If you go worldwide, you get all of them, obviously. And these people are sitting in the background. You never hear of them. In other words, they're like, all you hear is from politics.
Well, and the ones like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx obviously are having to play to Donald so that he doesn't get rid of them. I mean, you can see the pained expressions, the almost hostage video quality of some of their remarks, where they're trying to manage Donald because he doesn't get science. He doesn't know anything. And an interesting contrast to this is, you can like or not like Obama. And I wrote lots of very critical things about Obama and the Obama administration. But the man had a very elegant mind. And John Holdren, his science advisor, told me that he would complain that the papers he would take up to read every night in the residence were too short. And he wanted not 2 pages, but 16 or 18. And he would ask very smart questions because he conceptually got science and wanted to learn. Donald gets up with this just crazy stuff all the time, but he stays with his crowd stays with him. They're very deeply bonded. And one of the things George Lakoff has taught is that if you can take this fatherly bond, this authoritarian bond, and break it, it's devastating. It is a really serious break. And that's one of the reasons that I've repeatedly recommended, make fun of Donald. He's incapable of laughing at himself. So make fun of him because he'll do crazy things that, this election is about margins. All elections are about margins, but the number of voters in play here is a lot more than in recent 40 years of elections.
Oh, let me tell you about this election that I'm a little upset about. Is, okay, he sent out the stimulus check to a lot of people, right?
His name on it.
But not just his name on it. Whatever. He sent a letter saying, I made sure you got a check. Have you read it? Have you read the letter?
Oh, yes. And of course,
good
it's
marketing.
Congress.
Come on, that's good marketing.
There was one of the richest persons in Naples was running a huge shipping company. Actually, one of the ships of his company was hijacked in the 80s. The name was Achille Lauro, and he decided that he wanted to become mayor in Naples and run the municipality in Naples. But what he did was basically he went to all the people and basically gifted them pasta, something to eat, and one shoe. And when people say, "Oh, why are you giving me one shoe, only one shoe?" and he says, "Oh, if I get elected, you get the other one."
Okay, well that's politics. Okay, and the same thing with the check. I mean, the whole thing is that that's good marketing on the dots.
There's one thing which I mean, like Berlusconi. I know it's it looks like Italy is the of the world, but really Berlusconi Boris Johnson, Putin Putin is a little bit different because he has some kind of different features, let's say. But all those people drives on people who loves them unconditionally and who never challenge them.
Sure. Yeah, I mean
that's the first thing. And the other thing is that most of the base, I mean, Berlusconi was elected because he was very similar to most of the base who elected him.
Mhm.
He loved football, he loved women, he wanted good food, he was rich, and everybody. And there is this strange thing which has been, I think, accelerated by this new by the new media, social media, where rich is being rich and becoming rich without having actually any substance is kind of a new value, and I mean, I heard a lot of people say the same thing which they say about Trump. Wow, if Berlusconi was if Berlusconi was a successful entrepreneur, he will be a successful politician. But the Donald is bankrupt something like 10 times, but in Italy you have still a kind of stigma if you get bankrupt.
Yeah.
In the old days, you were actually disqualified from being an entrepreneur.
Roberto, in 57 years ago, Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he said, "I hope that my 4 children will grow up in a world where they will be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character." And what we've developed in America since Reagan came to power is a belief that it is the content of your wallet, or in Donald's case, the claimed content of your wallets, because he's not a billionaire, that is a measure. And we need to get back to virtues. We need to get back to recognizing that it is wisdom and sound judgment and respect for others and empathy that we want to honor in people, and get away from money porn. Money porn has been devastating to America. And I don't have anything against money. I went to work at 10 and full-time at 13 because I was in a poor family, and I'm a wealthy man by any reasonable standard. People in Wall Street would think I'm a pipsqueak, but by any reasonable standard, I'm a wealthy man. And so that's not an argument against people being successful and being wealthy, but it is an argument that we really do need to respect and honor and pay attention to judgment, education, and other virtues. And Donald Trump and Berlusconi, I think, are sort of the antis to that.
Well, you know what? I mean, I fully agree, David. I fully agree with you. It's and one of the main problems now is that school has been degrading. I don't know the level of schools and what you get from school in Europe is going worse and worse and worse every year. But there's a fantastic, there are those French comedies which are usually very aggressive on the social side. There is one of which is I think 2003, 2002. It's a way. I mean, it's at least 10 years old comedy where basically there is a crisis and this rich family from the center of Paris has to basically host a homeless guy which is grow up in Saint Denis, which is one of the banlieues, and they speak about politics and whatever, and there's one line where basically he says, well, I'm a racist because I'm in Saint Denis. It's easy not to be racist when you live in the 19th arrondissement, which is the center of Paris. But the real problem is that from the Reagan area, there's been all over the world in the modern Western countries, there's been a gap between rich people and others, which has grown and grown and grown. And the problem is that this kind of gap between the two communities is basically cannot be filled anymore. And most of the people is uneducated, extremely poor. And if you can appeal to this kind of people, you can get whatever you want. I mean, in Europe now, it's called populism. Populism it doesn't matter. I mean, it's something different from what they really are. They try to basically gain on the fear of the people, whatever it is, immigration, healthcare, poverty, unemployment. It's because you have the biggest part of the society is poor, and they resent, they really hate people who's rich, because they think that everybody who's rich has become rich not because he worked or he or she worked or studied or whatever, because somebody basically gifted richness or wealthiness or whatever to those people. It's when if we want to get rid of people who can be so divisive and dangerous for democracy, and I actually don't think that Trump is that dangerous for democracy, but others are. The only way to do this is to try to improve the condition of the most part of society, which is basically one of those tasks which is almost impossible.
Well, actually, I would argue that it's not. The average income of the bottom 90% of Americans, what I call the vast majority, 90%, is essentially unchanged from 1969 to 2018. Their income went up on the annual basis, on average, $218. I mean, I don't know who's going to notice the $4 and something in their paycheck gross every week. So it's been flat for 50 years. But that's because we got rid of unions. We allowed all of these monopolies to rise up, monopolies and duopolies and triopolies. And I think duopolies and triopolies are much worse than monopolies. We created all these make-work jobs in things like clerks and health insurance to process your claims and drive you crazy. And we stopped setting up a system where we have significant domestic capital investment. Our Congress has literally said to companies for years, go invest your money offshore and you will earn a higher rate of return, and we will give you various tax holidays to encourage that. And we now have a law that says you'd be an idiot to invest in a lot of things here in the US, capital intensive things, if you can make a deal in another country to pay little or no tax. So my argument is inequality in America, while partly driven by new technologies, as always happens when there's a breakthrough in a technology, is largely the result of government policies. And since we elect our officials, whether we meant to or not, we chose those policies. We can unchoose them. We can raise the average income in the United States and the median income quickly and significantly if we change our policies.
Yeah, but David, see, here's the problem. Since I spent most of my career doing estate planning with the wealthy Americans, and I grew up in a household that was basically a third-generation banking family from 1944, where they founded a company called Bank One that became Chase Bank, by the way.
So serious poverty in your background?
No serious poverty. As a matter of fact, somebody asked me, because when I owned multiple homes, they were going like, "Did you grow up poor?" No. Okay, so the thing is,
I'll put it to you this way: he didn't know what a styrofoam plate was.
But here's
the thing. What a styrofoam plate was when I met him.
No. Thing is,
we were at a function. We were at a function, and he goes, "I eat on this."
I don't eat at food trucks, and I don't hang out. But let me tell you, and I spent a good deal of my time in a place called Naples, Florida, and Palm Beach, Fort Myers, and Boca Raton. Matter of fact, I had a house in the best neighborhood called St. Andrews Country Club. Why? Because I was getting this snobby thing. I was living in Boca Fontana, which was a nice community by any standards. And as I went to all the country club crowd, where do you live? I live in Boca. Where in Boca? I was going, what is this about? I said, Boca Fontana. And they would do like that. So I found out what is the best and most expensive country club in Boca. It was St. Andrews Country Club, and I bought a house there. Then when people ask me a question, where do you live? I live in Boca. Where in Boca? St. Andrews Country Club. Shut up, everybody. Because they know it was the most expensive country club in the city of Boca to live, okay? And you find out that there's this whole cult, literally, of wealthy people. I mean, and they think differently than poor people, like big time different.
They love, one of the best tax avoidance lawyers in America.
Sure.
He teaches at No. The guy who teaches at the law school now at USC and used to be head of the Joint Committee on Taxation.
Oh, gosh, what was his name? Yeah, because I follow him all the time.
Anyhow, Ed, he in his book about how we raise money and how we spend money.
Sure.
He says, people like me talk about marginal utility. What difference does it make if you have one more dollar when you have $1 billion? And he said, that's not my experience with my clients. My experience with my clients is they love their money.
Oh, yeah.
They love their money. They totally love it. And they want more money. There isn't enough money, no matter how much they have.
Yeah.
And I think we need to recognize that. The way the ancient Greeks had a way of dealing with that.
Which was?
They honored people who paid big taxes.
Yeah.
They celebrated them. I think we should celebrate these people and make them public what they're paying.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
I'm being facetious.
No, I agree with you.
Kleinbart.
Okay. Listen,
We get a lot done with
David, you're speaking heresy. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let me tell you that is heresy, because one thing I did find out hanging out, like one of my clients was the founder of Dunkin' Donuts, the president of Kimberly-Clark, the president of Bausch and Lomb, okay, the president of Philip Morris. These are the people that I went to their homes, spent a lot of time with. I spent most of my.
I have a lot of friends who are. I have a couple of friends in the billionaire class. So I understand this.
And when I went to the University of Miami Law School, I found out, even though I was from a very well-to-do Tampa family, the guy I was in school with was Stuart Miller, whose dad was Leonard Miller of the Leonard Corp. Okay, and then all of a sudden you go, "Hey, I'm poor." In other words, when you hang around billionaires, you realize, "Hey, I'm poor."
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I didn't know that. But they had several things that were in common. And Dr. Tom Stanley at Georgia State wrote extensively about the millionaire next door, not the billionaire, because there's a little bit of a difference. But the thing is, they were parsimonious, AAK, tight and cheap. In other words, this whole idea that they're going to spend a lot of money and give money away, no. That is not in their vocabulary. Ain't going to happen. They hate taxes, and they hate the fact that people are trying to take their money and give it to whoever. There is no we, it's about them. Okay. Yeah. We and them is a whole different story. I don't believe the average American even understands. Now, here's the other thing. They work their butts off. These guys work really hard for that dollar bill. They will outwork the regular worker tremendously. So they do feel entitled, because they go, hey, I work 12 hours a day. These guys work 6 or 8 or whatever they work, and they work their butts off. So they had things in common. Here's the other thing they had in common. Some of these people are the nicest people in the world, but come on, you visit, they live well. They live in nice mansions. I mean, it's a whole different way of life and a way of thinking that the average American has no clue. And they are financially savvy. Very. And what happens is the average person on the street has this financial education compared to them. They're illiterate. They don't know anything about basic finances. They know nothing, the difference between a stock and a dividend. And so
they don't understand interest. They borrow money at ridiculous interest rates because they know better. I have a friend who's a quarter billionaire. And he started out poor. He went to college on scholarships.
Sure.
And we were having dinner one night at his house, and he was telling me, before a group of us all had dinner there, in his living room, which had original paintings it had a Moreau and a Titian, and I forget what else. That he works very hard to make sure his children don't realize how rich he is.
Right. Well, that's kind of hard.
He did require them to work in various, jobs kids work in, so they had an understanding of this. But anyway, he and I got into a little discussion, and I turned to him and I said, my guess is you have written checks to the government for your federal income tax in some years that exceed my lifetime earnings, which I'm going to guess are roughly $5 million at this point.
Right.
And he said, oh yeah. And I said, and what hurts, and I said, and you pay probably a lower tax rate than I do, because yours is almost all capital income and mine is labor income.
Percentage-wise.
And he said, well, yeah. And I said, and what hurts you isn't the percentage, it's the dollars. You sit there and say, boy, what I could do with those millions of dollars to build my business. Right. And here's the reason you need to do that. Because if other people don't come along and get the breaks you got, the scholarships and subsidies to get an education to get ahead, then nobody's going to be better off. You're better off when everybody is better off, pal.
Okay.
He and I had lunch for months, for several years, once a month. And that always sort of stuck with him. And I could see him fighting with it. He doesn't want to believe that. And yet logic side of him would say, well, of course.
Right.
But you see, you're exactly right about describing people. And by the way, I'm a literally 21st century tried and convicted heretic.
Right.
So,
okay. Right. Yeah.
tried
I
for
would have no
heresy and
doubt.
convicted.
Right. Yeah, but the thing is, you are speaking heresy when you're saying, okay, they need to get better, and that's true. I would like them to be more successful, and it's up to them. In other words, wait, you want me to give my hard-earned money to them? Give them?
I don't want people to give money. I want to set up a system where you invest capital, you invest your capital here. We make it lucrative to do so. And we have rights for workers, and compared to Europe, workers have no rights in this country.
Oh yeah. No,
I leave you with one. I love history, as you have maybe noticed. I leave you with one thing that is, if you go back in history, it's the same way of thinking as the French aristocrats before the French Revolution. The famous people doesn't have bread, give them croissant at the end of the day. Remember that what it ended up not very good for the aristocrats. So there's one thing which people who has power and is rich doesn't understand is if you don't, one is, of course, you get richer and richer and richer because you exploit poor people. But on the other side, poor people gets a little bit upset, let's say, and maybe being upset can be more dangerous than getting richer and richer and richer. So giving them back money maybe is the best way to get to the next generation and avoid other things. I love my head, and I wanted to keep with the rest of the body.
That's right. I don't want to lose my head.
Right. But see, that's European thing. Dude, that's a European thing. Over here, you have your freedom. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, because we're free to do anything we want,
but
don't mean I have to give money.
He wants to keep his head there with his body.
It's good as long as people doesn't get organized themselves. But if poor people, if a poor black and brown community starts to be organized and basically assaults Savannah, Georgia, or whatever, and kills all the rich people in the country, then
but see, conversely, Roberto, some of the poor people over here don't know they're poor because who their friends are. They're all poor people, and they all think the same, and they've never spent time with wealthy individuals. They have no clue who they are, what they think. A wealthy individual in Naples or Palm Beach is something they never really spent any time
with. There's always some housewife or desperate OC wives or housewives from Florida, basketball housewives, which shows how rich people live. So they show them how they live, but that's like watching a cartoon. There's a difference between showing how wealthy people live and then living like a wealthy person.
Yeah,
that's a big stretch. Okay, and the reason why you spend a lot of money to go to private schools like the University of Miami, or I went to University of Denver, is mainly it's a social class thing. You just don't want to hang around the people that went to state schools. And I will tell you, here's the funny thing: even though the tuition is extremely expensive at Miami, no one complained about it because they had plenty of money. At South Florida, I went to school because I went to a state school for a while. They all complained, and the tuition was like $1/4, and they could barely afford it. There is a big wealth gap in the United States that people don't know about and they don't even want to talk about. And our education system doesn't help because they're just starting some classes in financial fitness and literacy. But in reality, you go through your entire career of education here, and here's what you get trained on: finance, which is one of the most important things that you will ever experience in your life, is being financially fit. I mean, it dictates everything that you do. It dictates your marriages, how long your marriage is going to stand. It dictates your house you're going to live in, the cars you're going to afford, the bank account. It dictates everything. And your education is this in the United States. Why is that? Algebra 1 is very helpful. Don't get me wrong, if you're going to be an engineer. But other than that, come on, basic financial planning should be front and center. to everybody. So there's only two reasons. Well, there's several different reasons why that doesn't take place. Number one, the teachers aren't educated, so they can't teach the students. Okay, seriously. It's just like chess. I became a master chess player, but I wasn't taught. I went and learned it myself. Why? Because my teachers weren't, when I was in high school, I was way ahead of any teacher, not even close. You know, I was number 10 in the country, and they said, well, how'd you learn? I just picked up the books and read it. But that's the only way somebody's going to be educated. And same with financial planning, because it's not taught in our schools because the teacher don't know. Number two, you could have a conspiracy theory. Why would my wealthy clients want poor people to understand finances? Because then maybe it's going to be competitive out there. In other words, they would become competitive and they would become more financially savvy. Much easier to sell a person a financial product who's not savvy than the one that is. And so number three, there's no movement at all. It is a very boring topic. You know, financial planning is one of the most boring topics you'll ever meet, unless it affects you and you know really what it does.
Even people who get it affects, it's boring, so boring they don't want to do with it. But there's conspiracy number two.
Yes,
and then that's the one I've been lecturing on lately, is because the students graduate with such a high debt today. They don't understand interest and all of this stuff.
You know, we could do a whole
show.
It
is intended to enslave us to continue to have to work.
So in 2005, David, in 2005, when the bankruptcy,
it's all about enslavement.
The Bankruptcy Act was changed in 2005.
Oh no, I wrote for years about Elizabeth Warren's fight to not make that happen.
Okay,
I was 6 when it took effect.
Let me tell you, that created a new class that we have in the United States. It's called indentured servants.
Yep.
Okay, because student debt. Okay, Roberta, student debt is non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. Now, for me, it didn't matter. I went on the trust fund account, so it was irrelevant. But if you don't go on that and you go on the debt account, then it does make a difference, because when you come out, you cannot discharge that student debt in bankruptcy, which means you are an indentured servant.
Nick, I've debated people in Washington about this very point, and I've said that we're having the wrong debate about education in America. The debate should not be about should we or not have student loans. It should be, in the complex world we're in and we're moving into, what level of education is required to have a healthy society? And if that means 16 years or 20 years, then we got to figure out how to fund it.
Right.
And we should. And if some people only need an 8th grade education, maybe we should eliminate high school. But let's talk about what we need, and then we'll talk about how to pay for it. I do want to ask you something that you suddenly made me think of about financing college. The 2 youngest of my 8 children, we prepaid their tuition at private colleges, Bryn Mawr and Wellesley.
Yes.
I complained to Wellesley that they took the money for the last semester in December, because I said, look, if you take it in January, the student, when they get a job after college, can take advantage of this tax break. And they said, well, we didn't think about that. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, you know, less than 1% of your daughter's class, 400 people, so 4 or fewer, prepaid the whole 4 years tuition up front. Now, there were girls, young women my daughter went to school with, whose daddy would send the jet to pick them up, and take them home for the weekend. Why wouldn't they make the smart move and pay in advance for college? All over the country, it turns out, even people who saved, they pay each year instead of prepaying. Why would you do that?
Because they don't know. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of, because a lot of the problem with education in America and the financing of it is I don't know. The problem that
my assumption was their rate of return personally was such they didn't care.
And that could be true. In other words, things that may not make
much effort to think about. That a lot of people don't think about these things, David, because they don't know it exists.
But also the millionaire next door is different than the person who grew up in a millionaire family. Okay, it's just a different attitude. When you're the millionaire next door, you had to do it yourself, and that's a lot of work. Okay, when you grow up in a millionaire family, well, you don't have to do it yourself; you just inherit it, and it's a lot easier. Okay, so the millionaire next door actually studies all the little details of the financial aspects to make sure that they always do things financially proper for them. And by the way, that's most of the millionaires in the United States.
Oh, no, I understand. I still look back at all the financial mistakes I made, despite all my focus on it, writing about this stuff.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, the millionaire that inherited the money, they go, okay, so you lost a couple bucks. Who cares? Because you have so much coming in, and we do have a little bit of a lottery system here. In other words,
that's why in Italy you usually say that the first generation becomes millionaire, second generation tries to keep the money, third generation squanders the money.
That's right. That's basically what happens.
And just for you to know that, I was in one of the best university still university in Naples was good, but it's still good. But at the time was one of the best law schools in Italy, and I paid 500 euros. Let's say 600.
Oh yeah, no, 600
sure.
That's what I spend for dinner.
3.5 years, basically.
Right.
3.5 years. So.
Wow.
But on the other side, I had classes with 4,000 people. So
yeah, my law and pre-law students pay about $72,000 a year, not just for me, for the whole education.
Sure.
But that's an unbelievable amount of money to the vast majority of Americans, even with the financial aid that most of the students get. And they all walk out with a lot of debt.
Private school's about $200,000 for the 4 years.
Yeah, but the thing is,
that's not including their living expenses.
Yeah, but it doesn't make it. Most of the degrees you get in a 4-year degree, it doesn't make any financial sense, and you should probably go to a state school or a cheap school, whatever, in order to get your best deal on a 4-year education. You don't need that brand. But then again, we have a big education brand snobbery out there that's just absolutely incredible. And the thing is, like, if you're not Harvard, Yale, University of Chicago, or Stanford, guess what? There's a university called Berkeley. Okay, the Berkeley touts themselves to be a national school. Yet, if you go to their law school, you'll notice they hire 0 people from Southern universities. They all come from these 4 law schools, and then that's it.
I've worked for a U.S. law firm. So actually, there was one guy who had his LLM in Barclays, and he actually was. I mean, everybody was making jokes about him because he was not from Michigan. Because I mean, in Europe, Michigan is one of the biggest. I mean, the LLM of Michigan is very important, but he was not from the Magic 4 or 5, and everybody was making jokes about him and fun about him. And the only reason why he was actually hired with the law firm was that one of the Japanese partners went to Berkeley, and actually so they couldn't actually discriminate him just for being at Berkeley, because one of the partners was an alumni.
The education snobbery, I call it snobbery. I don't know how else to describe it.
It's snobbery.
Now, I teach at Northeastern University. I'm a professor at the graduate tax program at Northeastern. They did a great job.
You fly up there, once a week?
No, dude, this program, let me tell you, I've been on faculty at Northeastern for 10 years. Okay. I started with the program at the graduate tax 10 years ago online. It's still online. When I was living in Seattle, I live here now, and it's all online. Here's the good news about Northeastern. They pay, and I told Kim this, twice as much and then some of any other Southern school. Okay. I mean, seriously, because you want to know what do you get paid. And I said, look, I get paid twice as much at Northeastern than you will at University of North Carolina State, or Campbell Law, where I've taught Campbell Law. You get twice as much. Okay. Here's the problem with Northeastern. The tuition is like $60,000 a year. I mean, the thing is, they whack their students big time for the tuition, and I'm going, is it really worth it? And I teach for retirement plans. Now, here's the interesting thing, because they pay me so much at Northeastern, they give me a lot of time to do research. So I researched around the country to find out where can you get good education and retirement planning, because it is important, because someday people are going to retire. So I went to a university called...
Excuse me, I have to leave you. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank you for having me.
See you, Roberto.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Let's avoid.
We'll see you again. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay. Okay. So I went to Stanford. I went through their entire curriculum at Stanford. Harvard, Yale, and the University of Chicago.
They don't teach it.
MBA, and they do not teach retirement planning. There's not even one class. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you meet, or they don't teach anything about qualified plans or retirement. So if you went to Stanford, I can guarantee you, and you got an MBA or a JD, you know nothing about retirement plans. Same with University of Chicago, Harvard, and Yale.
You'll know the time value of money very well, but you
Oh no,
won't know
they
anything
know
about retirement.
Finances? Are you kidding me? You know, when
They
we
don't
hire,
want you to learn about money. They want you to be, just in the middle class. You get a salary. You don't know how to invest like the bankers.
Not at Stanford. They want you to go out and be an entrepreneur and leave a legacy to them.
Yeah, but
there's no practical entrepreneurship classes. All these professors are there. They haven't made it in the real world.
Well, yeah,
they haven't. They haven't.
Some of them are very well.
Go there right now. So
But it's not relevant.
Okay,
This
entrepreneurs.
is exponential. So what worked in the 80s is not working now. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's talk about entrepreneurship, because I started and bootstrapped 3 multi-million-dollar companies over the last 37 years. Okay, and I know what it takes to go in, start a company from scratch, bootstrap it, and make it a million or multi-million-dollar company, right? And I have a Juris Doctorate, an LLM, and a MBA. Okay, from private schools and public schools. Now, here's the interesting thing. I cannot get a teaching position in the United States on entrepreneurship anywhere in the country. Do you know why? I don't have a PhD.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I've been down this road before.
That's why, Nick.
What's my saying?
I don't have a. You got to have the PhD. I said, look. First of all, I got 2 problems with it. First of all, it wasn't even offered there was no PhD program in the United States until the late 1990s. I graduated from law school in '83. And I did all my degrees back then. So there's no way I could get it unless I did it recently, number one. Number 2, if you do have a PhD in entrepreneurship, there's a good chance you are not an entrepreneur, because it takes you like 4, 5, 6 years to get your PhD. And all you're doing is researching PhD. There's no way you have started a company and made millions.
No, so what we teach in business schools is what I call management by spreadsheet. And we end up with people like all the people who came out of Jack Welch's shop. They don't understand at all the human element. When I forget which one of them took over Home Depot, he looked around and said, one of the guys who was the crown prince who didn't get the job, and he went to Home Depot and he looked at their labor unit costs and he said, why are we paying all this money to these guys on the floor? Cut them to 19 hours a week, get them off the healthcare plan. And he couldn't get through his head that they're the do-it-yourself salesman who explain how you don't break the toilet bowl by understanding the torque wrench. And that's why I call this management by spreadsheet. These guys detract value. They don't add value to it. I just want to tell you one little thing about the snobbery of schools, and I got to go, Nick.
All right, sure.
My 7th child immigrated to Canada and went to law school there. And she has a very successful little practice representing children primarily in court by court appointment. But right after she graduated, she began being invited to social events where there were prominent lawyers and judges and government officials. And she said, I learned very quickly that you would be interrogated thoroughly about what you know and who you are as a lawyer, unless you could say, as I could, University of Toronto Faculty of Law. And she said, all vetting stopped the minute they knew you had gone to their top law school. And so Canadians are just like us in that regard.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Same in engineering too.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
You're a lawyer. The next question is, what law school do you go to? And then the education snobbery starts.
David, thank you so much.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Doctor.
Whatever that is. Right.
See you all.
Take care.
Thank you, David.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Nick